Welcome back to a brand new video. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey, and in this video I'll be showing you guys the process for this painting that took around a solid week of work to be completed from start to finish. This painting is honestly one of my favorites that I've ever completed, and I had an absolute blast during the process, and it took a lot out of me. It really stretched my creative muscles quite a bit. But during this voiceover, I want to talk a bit more about myself and give you guys some context for things that I've been doing on this channel. A lot of my videos recently have been focused on growing or planning your art career and income streams, and I wanted to give a bit more context for why these things are so important to me. I don't want you guys to think that I am just doing this for the money, that I'm just in it for the fame or that sweet YouTube AdSense or anything like that, especially because I am not even currently monetized right now. The reason that I am so conscious of income and income streams is because I grew up really low income by US standards. My mother was 17 when she had me. She was in high school at the time and ended up dropping out. It's honestly kind of terrifying to imagine her younger than I am right now with so fewer resources in trying to raise a kid. Both of my parents actually came from very working class backgrounds. My mother was raised by her grandparents and my father by my grandmother, who would later end up raising me. Both of them struggled a lot with drug addiction and pretty severe mental illness. I actually remember a few times as a young kid where my mom and I were in some pretty unsafe housing situations, and as I got a bit older, it often fell on me to be the more responsible party out of the two of us. Addiction, mental illness, and income instability often go hand in hand. Anyone intimately familiar with these issues knows it creates this cycle of poverty and, a lot of the time, homelessness and incarceration. And at a certain point, my paternal grandmother realized that both of my parents were pretty unfit to raise me in their current conditions, and she took over for them when I was about 5. She really stepped up to the plate here and took on an enormous responsibility when no one else wanted to, and got me out of a pretty awful situation. Despite the threat of homelessness and neglect no longer looming over me, I still wasn't financially comfortable, so to speak. It was pretty clear to me as a kid that our financial situation was at times a bit precarious, and we never had very much. I knew and internalized pretty early on that the way that I was going to break out of this pattern was to work really hard at school, get perfect grades, and apply for colleges and universities that would give me a full ride. I turned myself into the teacher's pet, grade A student out of necessity. I always did really well in school, but I always felt this enormous pressure to do well. In a lot of subjects like math and science, it wasn't something that came naturally to me, but I sort of forced myself to work as hard as I possibly could all of the time to succeed. And that's a lot for a kid to handle. All of this income instability and this pressure that I was putting on myself to rise above my situation came on top of me having to deal with a lot of, frankly, relentless emotional and psychological abuse coming from my grandmother's Christian fundamentalist far-right ex-husband. I'm not going to get into all of that in this video, but it was not a healthy marriage or a healthy household to be a part of. He thought that the former president, Barack Obama, was the Antichrist, that the man of the house should be in control of all of the finances, and essentially never questioned, and was constantly accusing my grandmother of cheating on him with random strangers at bars, his own sons, or even my best friend at the time, who happened to be a guy. Keep in mind that we were 15 and both my grandmother and her ex were over 50. It was really gross, and he was an incredibly insecure, jealous, angry person. All of that at home really fed into my desire to get a full ride somewhere and just basically escape. And this is the first time that I've ever really shared this. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable with being this vulnerable, but for whatever reason, recording this voiceover is way easier than talking to you guys in real life and telling you. The discomfort isn't in the you knowing, it's in the me telling. I don't have a problem with people knowing these things about me. I'm not ashamed of them. I think it actually is a thing that I'm really proud of, that I was able to surpass all of this, but the discomfort is in the act of me telling, because I don't think I'm 100% over all of that trauma yet. Anyway, I've been interested in a creative career for honestly as long as I can remember. From wanting to be a fashion designer when I was 10 to a novelist and an architect when I was 14 to an artist now, expressing myself has always been really important to me. Artistic pursuits help me work through things, to better understand my experiences and my emotions. Art is this fundamental part of my life and who I am, and I don't think I'd be able to function without it in my life. I actually had a brief period during quarantine when I wasn't able to do art, when I didn't have any of my materials with me and I was stuck in this bad housing situation with people that I didn't really get along well with, and that was one of the worst few months of my life. I think growing up low income, with money really at the forefront of my consciousness at all times, it's the leftover trauma that comes from someone making you feel bad about yourself and frankly unsafe, resulted in me not really feeling comfortable taking the kind of risk that you take when you major in art or creative writing. Majoring in art or creative writing requires some amount of self-confidence that you're gonna have a job, that you're gonna be able to find a job after graduation, that you're gonna be able to find some source of stable employment. And I didn't have that generational wealth to fall back on, and I didn't have that self-confidence when I first entered college. And there's, of course, that pervasive and really enduring misconception that creative careers aren't stable or financially successful, the myth of the starving artist. And I think that, coupled with everything else, really made me think that it just wasn't possible for me to pursue my dreams. And income insecurity is still really front and center of mind for me, even right now. As a person who grew up without a lot of resources, who worked really hard to get where I am right now, even though it might not seem like much, building financial security for myself is one of my top priorities. I'm incredibly lucky to be dating someone who has a really well-paying job and will be footing the bill for the bulk of our rent in New York City, but I'm in a significant transition period right now where I'm not making very much at the moment, and it's entirely up to me to change that. No one else is going to do it for me, and it's a lot of work, but all I can do is cross my fingers and hope that it pays off and keep putting in all of the work every single day and every single week. That's why I talk a lot about making money on this channel, about growing your income streams and building your audience. I'm not going to stop doing that. I'm not going to shy away from talking about my finances as my career develops, because I think being open and transparent about these things is important. You guys know that I love providing value on this channel. I love showing you all the things that I do to help me grow and succeed. The reason that I am so dedicated to doing that is because I know there are people out there watching this video right now that are just like me, with similar backgrounds to mine, who don't have that generational wealth to fall back on, that desperately want to be able to quit the rat race and sustain themselves with their creative practice. I want to be a full-time artist almost as much as I want to breathe. I want to wake up in the morning and do this every single day. It's what I feel called to do. It's actually a bit of a problem at the moment because I do really need to work on my web development portfolio in order to land freelance clients or find another part-time job to sustain myself, and it's hard to force myself to do those things because I don't feel called to it in the same way. It took a lot of work to shift my mindset and accept that I wanted this more than anything. I finally reached the point where I'm totally fine taking odd jobs, training myself in these other marketable skills, and getting income wherever I can while I build my career. I finally feel confident enough in myself and my skills to have faith that I can make these dreams come true. And it is a monumental shift from where I was 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. And speaking of dreams, this painting feels a lot like a dream. I actually took the reference photo of this piece myself. One of Drake's friends got married recently, and we drove about 5 hours to go to their wedding in Wisconsin one way. And as the hot summer day transitioned into a cool summer night, the sunset was truly phenomenal. The view you're seeing right now was to the left of the sunset proper, but the wispy clouds and the soft blue lighting really inspired me. Just a few months ago, I would have never attempted a piece as complicated as this, and I had to give a lot of thought to my approach going into it. I ended up doing a far more complicated underpainting than how you've seen me work before, as you guys saw in the process, doing a sketch and then a full color block in and building up these layers of foliage with a lot of care. Lately, I've been doing far more timed practice than before, and this piece was a really big shift from that because it did take me a full week of work. I don't think I'll stop doing timed practices anytime soon, but I wanted this piece to really be a challenge for me, and it definitely rose to the occasion. I had to cut out quite a bit of the process footage just because I repainted parts of this piece 5 or 6 times. The bushes to the left and the foreground of this piece took a lot of work. Complicated brush like this, where you have tall grass and bushes and they're all layered on top of each other, it requires a lot of ingenuity, I think, in the approach, because you want it to feel real, but also a little bit stylized. You don't want to have to paint every single stalk or piece of grass individually. Do you know what I mean? So I eventually did this much more complicated color block in, and I repainted it a bunch of times, and I think finally at the end of this process, I was able to get to a point where I felt really proud of myself and where I thought it looked pretty good, even though if you look at the reference photo in comparison to the painting, they don't really look anything alike. I wanted this piece to feel dreamlike, or like sort of transitory in a way, an ode to a fleeting moment in time, the times where your life is just about to change forever but hasn't quite yet, and you're standing on the edge of these two periods. I listen to a lot of music and podcasts as I work, and actually binge watched the entire first season of Hulu's Catherine the Great while working on this piece. Elle Fanning plays Catherine, and aside from being an incredible actress, the single-minded focus she portrayed Catherine as having in pursuit of her goals, in this case of killing her husband and masterminding a political coup to wrest control of Russia, drove me to keep going during the more technically difficult parts of this piece. Like staging a coup, working on this painting required me to take a lot of really big risks. From the technique that I used to paint the clouds over here, to leaving the flowers that you're seeing peppered throughout the painting, but most obviously on the right-hand side, kind of unfinished and more gestural and expressionistic than anything else, was a big risk. I was wondering if I should add more detail to them, and eventually I decided not to, and I think it looks totally fine in the context of the rest of the piece, but that was a pretty sizable risk that I took. A lot of what you do in painting, I think, is taking really calculated risks, trying to figure out what will work and what won't. And I'm really thankful that I've been able to do more practices lately with oil painting. I'm really glad that I've developed my skills to reach this point, and I am so thankful that you stuck around until the very, very end to see the finished product. If you haven't already, consider hitting that like button and subscribing, because I do post content like this every single week, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.